soon. We have a number of people whom Dr. J. Smith probably have introduced in the past on his channel, have even introduced in different formats concerning their research when it comes to the holes in the standard Islamic narrative. I myself have the privilege, of course, of introducing Brother Mill, who will be one of those guests, but we have others such as Brother Murad. We have also Odin. We have Paul and Paul Ellis, if you wish. And also we have Thomas. But I'm just giving you a flavor of those guests that will be joining us. And each one of them have a passion about a specific topic related to the standard Islamic narrative, but also they've covered many other areas, obviously. However, we are going to let them unpack things for us from that perspective. Now, a couple of special things about this particular live stream. It will be a 2-hour live stream, so make sure if you're planning on staying the whole time to plan for 2 hours. If not, obviously you can always watch it at a later time if you could not really continue for that long. It is going also to be part of my radio podcast, Let Us Reason. That's why every 25 minutes or so, we are going to take a quick break and we will start again with part 2 and then part 3 and part 4. As far as our viewers are concerned, feel free to send your questions. However, be patient with us because we have a lot of stuff that will be covered here and it's going to be a 2-hour long. So we'll do our best to capture some of your questions as time permits, and we'll do our best to address your concerns and your comments as well. But let me start first by introducing our dear brother, Dr. J. Dr. J, thank you so much, of course, for doing what you do, brother. It's really amazing the type of comments that I get all the time about the work that you've been doing. I'm blessed to have this partnership with you. It seemed like we have this rapport together and people enjoy really this dialogue. I bring my background, I'm a former Muslim, I speak Arabic, I'm from Saudi Arabia, which is the focus of your research, has to do with Mecca, which is in Saudi, and also the Quran and the man, which is Muhammad, all are associated and affiliated according to the Islamic narrative, obviously the standard Islamic narrative with that region. This is why I enjoy to have this back and forth with you and also to confirm some of the facts that you are presenting, because people, I know how my Muslim people think. They may accuse you of like, you don't know what you're talking about. You've never been there. Well, you have someone who's been there, so we can complement one another. But what got you yourself into this particular field?
Well, it happened way back in the 1990s. I was in London. I was living in London. I was there for 25 years. I would go down to a place called Speaker's Corner, and I was taking a course at School of Orient and African Studies from Dr. Gerald Hotting. And the course was on the historical perspective, looking at history, the historical critique of Islam, the emergence of Islam. And it was an entire year course of just looking at how Islam actually emerged from the historical standpoint. What does history actually tell us? And I remember as I started taking this course, there were about 40 or 50 students in the class. Within 2 weeks, a good 20 of them had left, and they were all Muslims. And some of them, as they left, they were slamming the door and yelling explicatives, which I'm not permitted to repeat right now, about what he was saying, because what he was doing, he was just asking what was really happening in the 7th century from what history can tell us. So this was back in 1993, 1994. I started seeing the reaction of the Muslims, so I started taking it down to Speaker's Corner and started introducing it at Speaker's Corner. And it was the reaction of the Muslims when they heard this kind of material, because they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to respond to it. Oh, I got punched. I got my glasses broken. It was obvious to me that this historical critique, at that time, I said, this has got to be the Achilles heel of Islam. If they can't respond, if this is the only response they can give by yelling and explicatives and slamming the door, leaving the class, and at the same time at Speaker's Corner, if all they can do is punch me, we have got something here. And I started to think, and I said, hold on a minute. If this was done to me with Christianity, would we not have the same problems? And I remember in my days as a seminary student where we studied the historical critique. We looked at redacted criticism. We looked at textual criticism of the Bible. We looked at source criticism of all these stories. I remember going to this during my master's thesis, and we realized, hold on a minute, we have already had this. This has been done to us, and Christianity has pretty much been able to, not only has been able to answer every one of these criticisms, but has been fomented because of these criticisms. So why can't we take the same questions, the very same questions that were asked of Jesus, whether or not he existed, whether or not he died on the cross, ask the same questions of the Bible, whether or not we can go back to the manuscripts, looking at the textual criticism that is done of the Bible, ask those questions that have already been done on our Lord and our Savior and on our scriptures, and let's take it to Islam, on their man, their book, and now more recently, their place. The book would be the Quran, the man would be Muhammad, and the place, of course, would be Mecca. So that's what I started doing. That was 1994. 1995, I did my first debate on this, and this was with Dr. Jamal Badawi at Cambridge University, Trinity College. I did a 2-hour debate, and all I did was ask 10 historical questions, all of which I got from Dr. Patricia Corona the week before. Dr. Patricia Corona, as you well know, is probably one of the leading scholars she's no longer living in this area. She was head of department there at Cambridge University, and she was the one that put that debate together for me. 10 historical challenges, none of which have been resolved, have been answered by Muslims. And that was in 1995 that I did that debate. So here we are at the end of 2021, and we're still asking the same question. But then what happened was about a year and a half ago, you remember that interview between Dr. Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab, where they asked the question about the Qiraat in the Ahruf, and he put out his hand and says, which are you going to put there? And Yasser Qadi says, we don't talk about this in public. This is something we don't talk about. If you want to take a deep dive, then you want to come with me and show that, and then take a deep dive, then you can take my class, but don't talk about this, not with the camera on. And I suddenly realized, hold on a minute, this stuff, this material, this is one of the leading scholars can't even talk about this in public, why are we keeping this quiet? Why shouldn't we be mass producing it all over the internet, certainly? And as I started bringing this up on the internet, I started coming across really main players, people who really knew what they were talking about, other individuals that I started saying, hold on, this guy knows what he's referring to. And I had already heard of Mel, who you're going to introduce next. Mel is the one I first came across because he was actually part of our team. He used to come to Speaker's Corner before I left in England. He was the first one that I started engaging with this. Well, Mel introduced me to Paul, and Paul you're going to see him coming on. It was because of what I was doing on the coins that I got introduced to Odun. Odun wanted to talk with me about the coins, and I saw this guy really knew his material. And then I was introduced by Mel to a guy named Murad from the Middle East, and Murad came on board, and I said, these guys are brilliant. These guys are brilliant. But then I came across another name there, a guy named Thomas. And I said, who's this Thomas guy? Here I find out he's from Germany. But I was just looking at the comments below the videos on Fender Films. And the comments are brilliant. And I hope you look at your comments, because when you look at the comments, you start to see who are the people who really know what they're talking about, who are the people who have really done their homework, who are the people who are actually coming up with reference after reference. And I contacted them. And I said, can you come on board? Can you say, I don't want to be the one to hear it. I want the whole world to hear it. Why don't you come on board and let's have you unpack this material? So that's why we brought them today. I want these 5 guys for you to see, for your audience, because your audience really hasn't, except for Mel, you really don't know these guys yet. You haven't really come across them yet. And I want you to introduce to your group, because your group is even larger than what I have. I want your subscribers to start to get to a whole new panoply of major players. These are the major players. And so these guys, as you're going to find, have not just been doing this for a few weeks. They've been doing this for years. And the material that they have come up with, you and I can communicate it. And that's our job. We're sitting there to communicate it, to make sure it gets out to the world. But the men who are actually doing the research, the hard research, are the ones we're going to introduce now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this excellent segue.
Well, before we go on, we are calling ourselves the Sin Sifters. What is a sifter? This is a sifter, folks. Let me just show it to you. Listen, I was getting back all this. What did you mean? What does sifter mean? And it's all from guys. If you are women, you know exactly what I'm talking, because every one of you women have one of these in your kitchen. This is where you sift through. What do? You put things through you, and what comes out is the good stuff. You want to get the bad stuff that stays in there, and you throw the bad stuff away. What we're doing is, and every one of these guys that we're going to introduce this afternoon, they have been putting the standard Islamic narrative into this. And what's coming out of it is what is actually historical. So we're sifting the S.I.N, the standard Islamic narrative. We're sifting sin. So you can see it's a play on words. for obvious and people who get it. We're sifting the sin, the standard Islamic narrative, and we're trying to find out what is historical. That's why we're calling ourselves the sin sifters. We are the ones that really are trying to get back not to the 8th, the 9th century or 10th century. We want to go back to the 7th century. We want to go back to when it all began. When is the standard Islamic narrative tells us it all began. That's the name, the reason for the name.
Wonderful. Thank you, brother. Again, if you're joining us right now, we are doing a 2-hour special live stream with Dr. J and a team of amazing researchers and scholars that we will be introducing soon, who have been pouring into basically the standard Islamic narrative, sifting through, as Dr. J just mentioned, and trying to compare and contrast facts with at least what the standard Islamic narrative has presented to us, and deciding what really is considered to be historically factual versus what might be a just simple narrative that cannot be corroborated with a number of evidence that has been unpacked so far, and possibly even more in the future. Now, if you are listening to us on our podcast, this is also a special live stream of our Let Us Reason. It's going to be actually 4 parts for our radio audience. This is part 1. And we will introduce shortly the first guest, Brother Mel. But before I do so, I just want to remind our also amazing control room. At some point, I would like to start seeing the comments in front of me, so to see if anyone is asking any specific questions, because we are dealing with live audience as well. So we'll start with Brother Mel. Brother Mel, thank you so much, of course, for taking time to be here with us. You and I actually have interacted numerous times, and just up until recently, we actually did, if I recall, 9 or 10 video series. We even called it Holes in the Narrative, and you brilliantly came up with a number of evidences that can show why at every single level, in every episode, there is a hole that cannot be really basically vouched for if we rely only on the historical data provided to us by the narrative itself. Rather, your findings pointed out to an obvious contradiction. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself one more time, Mel, to our audience, to the level you feel comfortable with, and tell us about your passion. I mean, you deal a lot with maps, iconography, tomes, things like that. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm Mel, and I'm from Ireland. I got involved with Jay back in 2015 at Speaker's Corner. I was one of the quiet ones in his group, observing, taking notes, and I was really fascinated with a video that he did on the internet to do with the historical critique of Islam. And around that time, Dan Gibson's theory was really big, and it just grabbed me. It was like a big puzzle I wanted to solve. And like a lot of people, I looked at the hadiths, and I spent about 3 months reading through al-Bukhari's hadiths and realized pretty quickly that this is just fantasy stuff. So I went from there to look at, well, is there anything historical in that story? And so I decided to look at the earliest sources I could find about Muhammad. So I was kind of focused mostly about Muhammad for the first couple of years. And the big one that really stood out was the 2 earliest sources placed someone called Muhammad, in inverted commas, or anonymous prophet, in Palestine in 634. And I went, hey, that doesn't quite fit the standard Islamic narrative. So we have him in the wrong place and at the wrong time. He's meant to be dead 2 years, and yet the 2 earliest sources we have him still alive. And it seems to coincide, incidentally, with the time that Umar was meant to be the leader at that time. So that was a big, interesting sort of area. And since then, I've been a bit of a jack of all trades. I've been looking at different things, been looking at maps, I've been looking at archaeology, books, you name it. And I don't tend to stay at one particular area too long. Something grabs me. I have a few curious questions, and it leads me off down a merry-go-ride, and things tend to come out of the surface. But I think one of the things that's really grabbed me of late are maps. And if you ask a few basic questions and you look at the maps, the standard Islamic narrative is completely thrown out by that. And you see that everything is up north, and this is a common theme. Every time you delve into this, you keep seeing that it must have happened up in the north and not down south. For example, if you ask, where were the Christian communities that Muhammad was supposed to have interacted with up in the Fertile Crescent? Where were the Jewish communities up in the Fertile Crescent? Where are the stations of Abraham that the Quran refers to? It's again up in the Fertile Crescent. Where were the populations? You know, every question you ask, where was the conflicts between the Byzantines and the Persians? Way up north. And then when you compare that with the Hijaz, what you find an area that has no people, by and large. It has no water, has no vegetation, it has no history, has no culture. And then you try and match that up with the Hadiths, and you have to conclude that something was made up along the way. And the more I went into it over the last few years, the more I discovered that there was less and less true about it. So that's where I'm at. That's sort of a quick summary of where I've come.
Yep, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's, of course, fascinating. And of course, we're going to visit with you. Obviously, we still have at least an hour and a half left, a little over. And I'm trying to see some of the comments, by the way, folks. So forgive me. It's still hard for me to see all of it. But we will get back to the comments probably starting in the next part. Now I'm going to move on to Brother Murad. Brother Murad, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit also more about yourself to the extent that you feel comfortable, of course, to do so. And I know you've done some amazing work concerning the name Muhammad, especially in the Quran. So if you can shed some light on that.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Murad. I am an amateur Arab researcher who has been looking into the history of Islam for more than 10 years. So basically, I am a little bit like Al-Fadi, but the only difference is his English is much better than mine. I am a Muslim, then I became an atheist, but now I consider myself a theist. So I believe in God, but in a very primitive manner. Robert Spencer's debate with David Wood, did Muhammad exist, is what actually inspired me to look into the historical critique of Islam. Most people know me from Mel's channel, Sneakers Corner, so if you think like Batman and Robin, Mel would be Batman, I would be Robin. I have been his sidekick for like 2 years. But the most exposure was the video that we did, me and Mel, with Dr. J. Smith on the Dome of the Rock. It surpassed 100,000 views. And my new YouTube channel will focus in 2022, this year, about the Aramaic roots of the Quran, the meaning of the Quran, the real meaning of it. And I will depend on the work of Christoph Luxemburg and also Gabriel Sauma, not just Luxemburg. And about the name Muhammad, yes, I looked at the 4 references to Muhammad in the Quran, and I see that they're actually a reference to Jesus. So if you read this name as a descriptive title, then it will work perfectly, you see.
Wonderful. And, folks, we're going to have about 4 minutes, 5 minutes left, give or take. So I'm just going to ask a quick question. We get to Odin also. Jay, you did a show with Murad about the name Muhammad, correct?
Yeah. And actually, we did 2. We did one on the Dome of the Rock, and we also did one in the Quran itself, the 4 references to Muhammad in the Quran. And Murad has been great because he showed that very clear. In fact, let Murad just answer that. What did you find out about the name Muhammad in both of the Dome of the Rock and also in the Quran?
Well, you see the name Muhammad, if you look at it, how it was written in Aramaic, the name Yeshua. The name Yeshua is written, it looks almost identical to the name Muhammad. So it's very possible that when they Arabized the Quran at a later stage, that they read this name in this way. So Al-Muhammad means Al-Mumajjad, and this is what we say in Arabic. So, and everything in the Dome of the Rock, it's actually an attack on Christianity. And if I was going to construct the Dome of the Rock, the first thing I would like to put inside is the verses relating to the night journey, not attacking Christianity. So we will find that this also hits the night journey, and it was an attack, I think, on Byzantine Christianity. Basically, Abdul Malik was like flexing his power, and also Abdul Malik, he tried to make counterfeit coins against the Byzantine emperor. So there was this fight. This is not something that we are coming up with, you see.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Odin, we're probably going to have to pause here and get back to you in the second part. We have about maybe 3 minutes left. So I want to give you enough time to really address your background and your focus. So if you don't mind holding off for a few more minutes. But I want to revisit one more time our audience here and thank you for joining us in this, in my view, historic actually live stream. Not only it's 2 hour long, but we have amazing researchers here with us. You've been hearing a lot about this standard Islamic narrative from Dr. J, and even here on my channel whenever I have him here, and we've been doing series. But now you're seeing the faces, or at least you're hearing the voices of the people behind this amazing research. And we wanted them really to have this platform to introduce them to you as well. I know many on Dr. J's own platform are familiar with these fascinating researchers, amazing researchers. And I would like for my own viewers also to have this opportunity to know about them and hopefully even interact with them. We're going to ask each one of them to tell us, obviously, if they have their own platforms, their own YouTube channels at some point today, so that you can connect with them, learn from the work that they're doing, interact with them as well directly. Of course, this is also part of our podcast, Let Us Reason. That's why this is going to be part 1. For you as our radio listeners, this is going to be 4 parts, meaning 4 weeks in a row or 4 weekends in a row that you will be listening to this. But if you want to really get, ahead of the game, quicker into this, you can go to either my YouTube channel, CIRA International, or to Dr. J. Smith Fonder Films YouTube channel, and go to this specific live stream that is airing right now on December 20th, 2021, and you will be able to watch the entirety of this live stream. Dr. J, anything else?
Just one thing, what Murad said, just why did he talk about the night journey? Because if you ask any Muslim why the Dome of the Rock is important, every Muslim will tell you that is where Muhammad went in the middle of the night there at around 6:21 on the back of the winged horse called the Burak up to Jerusalem, and there he went up to the 7 heavens. That's why the building was there to commemorate it. There's no reference anywhere to that night journey anywhere on any of the inscriptions of the original inscriptions. The later inscriptions from 1878, that's the 19th century, they had to be added on the outside of the building to alleviate that problem. But the original inscriptions, they're all about attacking Jesus Christ, attacking his divinity, attacking the Trinity, attacking his sonship. And then you have this amazing phrase, for there is only one God but God, and the Muhammadur Rasulullah, that means Muhammad, the praised one, is nothing more than the servant of God. Who do you think that's referring to? Of course, that would be referring to Jesus.
Right. Thank you for adding that. And I think we are reaching the conclusion of our first part for our podcast series, Let Us Reason. Stay tuned for just a few seconds as we will make this transition over to part 2, at least you as our live audience here. And thank you again for, to you, Dr. J, and thank you to everyone who is with us here in studio, or at least virtually. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you back, of course, next time to a continuation of this series. Blessings to you. Okay, well, this is now, we're kicking off our part 2 of the first hour of this live stream. Still, it's part of our podcast, Let Us Reason, but also it's part of our live stream that we are doing right now. And we have intentionally called this particular live stream, as you've heard us mention that a couple of times already, Historical Critique of Islam, Introducing the S.I.N Sifters. And what do we mean by S.I.N? Stands for the Standard Islamic Narrative. What do we mean by sifters? Dr. J, why don't you show people what we mean by that?
There's a sifter right there. This is, I know what this is because my wife has asked me to use it quite often to take material that has lots of imperfections in it, and you want to sift that which is pure. That which is imperfect stays behind, that which is pure falls, and that is what you hold, you put it in a bowl, and you take that and you use it. Now, what's left behind, you throw it away. Right. So what we are doing, we are the researchers who are sifting sin. We put sin into this. That's S.I.N, Standard Islamic Narrative. Joe actually may have come up with this. I think Joe is the one that actually came up with this, the name, the acronym S.I.N. So we need to give credit where credit is due. But it was the idea of taking the Standard Islamic Narrative on a play off from what Yasser Qadi did way back in June 8th, 2020, where he actually says the Islamic narrative or the standard narrative has holes in it. Listen, there's all kinds of holes. Look at all the thousands of holes that we have here. We're finding all kinds of holes. And that's why what's fascinating to us is the sin sifters. We're the ones who are sifting away the chaff. We're getting away the chaff and coming back to what is left behind. What is left behind is actually the historical material. We've said this over and over again, haven't we? In all of our broadcasts, I say it on Fandor Films with all of my friends here. We're always going back to the 7th century. We want to know what really happened historically. We want to know what really happened on the ground. We want to know where it was going on, who it was with, and what is it that they were doing. And we're not interested in the 8th and 9th century. We're sifting all that out and taking in what's left behind is the actual historical truth. So we are the sin sifters. We are the S.I.N sifters.
Thank you. Thank you. And before last part, we had the privilege of introducing three of our guests, Dr. J, Brother Mel, and Brother Murad. We are going to introduce also three more, Odin, Paul, and Thomas. But obviously, before I do that, I want to remind people that this is a 2-hour long live stream. So we're not going to cover a whole lot yet in part 2, but part 3 and part 4, when we're going to unpack even at a deeper level, more of the work that is being done, or maybe even some of the work that will be done in 2022. And just a side comment, just to my amazing team at the control room, I am still unable to see my side. If we can raise somehow the TV or see the timer as well, because I am not able really to see all of that as of yet. So it's just a matter of logistic location of these things, but thank you so much for doing that. So, Odin, welcome. And this is really a privilege and an honor for me to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, and I am excited that also our viewers now to get to see who you are. So why don't you do the same thing? Just give us a little bit about your background, and at the same time, just tell us about the passion that you have when it comes to this standard Islamic narrative.
Well, hello Al-Fadi, hello everyone, hello Jay. Thank you for having me. So, as for me, I'm talking from France. I live in Paris, and I came across Islam something like 15 years ago through a Muslim colleague who talked to me about his faith, and he talked to me also about what we call the standard Islamic narrative. At the time, I was working as a strategy consultant in a small firm in France, a bit like McKinsey, if you know. And I was very curious, and I had a very scientific mind, and I wanted to understand, because what my friend, what my colleague told me did not fit what I knew about the Bible, did not fit what I read in the Quran that I bought at the time. And so I think there was something odd in this standard Islamic narrative, that it did not fit the description of my friend of a religion completing Christianity, completing Judaism, because what we read in the Quran does not fit this at all. In the Quran, we find something else. It's not a completion. It's not something that comes after Christianity to better it, but it's a sort of setback. You go back to a sort of Judaism. This is what I first understood when I read the Quran. And then I thought to myself, there must be something. I have to look into the origins of Islam, and I have to look it in a scientific way. And I took interest in all the researches, and I discovered that the scholars made huge breakthrough in the field of the origins of Islam. Jay was speaking of Gerald Houghting, of Patricia Crone, but in France there are many other scholars, and I've met one, Dr. Edouard Marie Galez, who actually is from Belgium. He's not French, he's Belgian. And he published a thesis in 2005, a huge thesis, 1,200 pages, about the origins of Islam, which is named Le Messie et son prophète, the Messiah and his prophet. And for the first time, I had a sort of some synthesis of all the discoveries the scholar had made before 2005. I met him, I befriended him, I worked with him, he taught me everything he knew, and I wrote with him a little book about his thesis, which is called The Great Secret of Islam, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, which is a small book for the general public, because the general public cannot access a thesis which is 1,200 pages. And this book had a lot of success here in France. Thousands of copies were sold, and 100,000 electronic copies were downloaded. And this put me in a situation where I had to continue to keep on studying and to keep on with with science, because I wrote the book in 2014, and thereafter the discoveries kept on happening. And for example, I befriended the director of the INARA Institute. I attended many conferences there. I kept on reading, meeting scholars. And I did a sort of big update of my book, my French book, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, The Great Secret of Islam, which will be soon available in English. And what I intend to do is to present to the general public a sort of synthesis, the big picture, in fact, the big picture of what happened in the 7th, the 8th, and 9th centuries when Islam emerged. And we can do this now, we can draw this big picture because we have new material, new studies. And especially we have, for example, coins that show us that the first Arab leaders were not Muslims, but kind of Christians or kind of Zoroastrians in the East, that they did not bear the Caliph title, for example, until Abdul Malik. He was the first one to bear the Caliph title. So what about the 4 Rashidun Caliphs? But mainly and mostly, the main discoveries have been made thanks to Quranic studies, and especially to the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie-Gallès featured in his thesis. He worked with Eastern Christian scholars who know Aramaic and Arabic. And thanks to this, a new reading of the Quran has been made possible. You see, most people, and especially Muslims, read the Quran according to the standard Islamic narrative. When they read Rasul, they think, oh, it must be Muhammad. When they read Bayt, they think it must be the Kaaba. When they read Nazarene, they think it must be the Christians. But is it really? And what Edouard Marie-Gallès and his scholars did is applying to the Quran the exegesis method he learned as a priest. Because as a priest, he became very knowledgeable in exegesis, which is very simple. It's basic common sense. It is about reading a text for what it is, what it says literally. And when you do this with the Quran, you start to unveil another story. In the Quran, you find that there is a Jewish community, a Nazarene Jewish community, that was very, very influenced with its Arab audience. You find that there was an alliance between this Jewish Nazarene community and the Arab audience, an alliance which had the purpose to conquer Jerusalem, rebuild its temple, to trigger the apocalypse, to have Jesus come back as its second coming, as the Messiah, and to establish God's kingdom on earth. That did not happen. So the Arab leaders took it upon themselves to do Jesus' job, because he did not come back. And so they fought among themselves over the issue of the divine legitimacy of their power. And then emerged the strongest, who was Abdul Malik, who beat all of his rivals and who established the first caliphate. What is the caliphate? The caliphate is ruled by a caliph, and Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Hala, God's caliph, which means God's lieutenant on earth, God's vicar. So the caliphate is kind of God's kingdom. It is the territory where God's justice is enforced. And from there, Islam started to deploy, to emerge. But it is not until the Abbasid revolution, when the Abbasid coalition took power and overthrew the Umayyads, that we really saw Islam happening as a new religion, because it is the Abbasids who invented the very idea of a divine revelation in order to justify their divine power. They could not justify their power as Abdul Malik did, because they just beat his successor. And so they invented this idea of a divine revelation. So they needed a prophet. Then they invented the prophecy of Muhammad. And they needed this revelation to be something. So they invented the Quran as the sacred word of God. And they invented the story of the revelation, the Asbab al-Nuzul. They invented Mecca and so on. And so we now have a sort of very big picture, a grand scheme of things, to explain how Islam emerged and to explain what is the Quran, what is Mecca, what is the prophet. Did Muhammad exist? Was he a real prophet, an actual prophet? And so on. But I want to insist on the very novelty of the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie-Galès introduced, thanks to his Eastern Christian friends.
As you can see,
it is really amazing. You find that the Quran itself can be used as an historical material and can give us proof, evidence, hard evidence of events of the real story, of the actual story, which is what I called the great secret of Islam.
Right. And Odin, I think we want you to hold off to sharing more in a little bit, because this is fascinating, of course, background that you've given people about your focus on the big picture here, which is very important, because really it goes into the heart of the origin of Islam, or at least the official origin of the religion as we know it today, and the mention of the Caliph Abdul Malik, obviously. So we'll circle back to you shortly here. Hopefully, if not this part, it will be the next part. Now I want to move on to Paul. And Jay, why don't you go ahead and introduce Paul to us real quickly and let him also take it from there.
Oh, I like Paul to introduce himself. I really got to know Paul just a few months ago. And what I've enjoyed about Paul, he is coming from a whole different standpoint, looking at what we call the Jerusalem thesis. This is his really, I think he actually coined it as well. Now, I understand that Paul is not feeling so well today. So over to you, Paul. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Feel free if you do have to cough or you have to take a drink of water. We understand. Thank you for even coming on board for us, because it's great to have you. It's good to hear your side of things.
No, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Al-Fadi, for having me. Yes, my background is that I was born in Yorkshire, in Bradford, which is on its way to becoming a great Islamic city of the West. I've been living in London since 1984, and so I really regard myself as a Londoner now, primarily. I was a lawyer for 20 years, working in a criminal court in London. And then I left that and I became a teacher for a while. In 2018, there was a conference in England, in London, and there were some really great names in Islamic research there. I'm ashamed to say I didn't really appreciate quite how illustrious these people were at the time, but I just bought a ticket because I was interested and I had a bit of time on my hands. And there were it was Nikolai Sinai was there, and Gabriel Said Reynolds and Sean Anthony, and I sat a couple of seats down from Stephen Shoemaker. And I didn't really know who any of these people were, but I absolutely fell in love with the topic of the Quran and the great mystery of what it means. And it was quite clear from the first couple of hours that Islam is completely different. The Quran is completely different to what Muslims think it is. It's absolutely beyond doubt, but there's no consensus within the academic community as to what the Quran actually is or what it means. So you've got this hugely important book, a book that's something like a fifth to a quarter of the world's population assert is the words of God, a book that governs such a huge swathe of the Earth's territory, from the North Atlantic right the way down to the South Pacific. And yet, what people believe about it simply isn't true, just on a simple factual level. So I was enthralled by this, and I so happened, I'm not a wealthy man, but I had a little bit of money that came my way. And I decided to give myself a sabbatical year and to spend the year reading and books and articles by these people and trying to figure out myself what I thought about it all. See if there was anything that I could contribute to this debate, which seemed to me vitally important and wide open. As Jay says, I've become most associated with what I call the Jerusalem thesis, which I first shared on Mel's channel about 18 months ago. And this is, in a nutshell, that when the Quran refers to a place as the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred place of prostration, and refers to it by various other names, the Station of Abraham, or the Kaaba, or God's house, the Holy House. These are all references to the Jerusalem temple. And the more one looks at it, one simply cannot move for evidence that this is the case. Is there so much evidence that one can't really summarize it? There's just so much of it. For example, one has the correspondences within the Quran to say that everything the Quran says about the Masjid al-Haram seems to be something that relates to the Jerusalem temple. They say that it was built by Abraham, as the Quran says it was built by Abraham, and in the Bible, the temple is built on the site where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice Isaac. It says it's the first house at Bakar. Well, Bakar is a pilgrimage destination on the way to, or stopping point on the way to the pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple. It's frequently referred to as God's house, but then the Quran devotes so much of its text to dealing with biblical characters and biblical stories. But where would these biblical characters, where would they regard as God's house? There's nothing in the Quran that ever indicates that that God had two houses, or that God moves his house, or that indeed that there's any kind of geographical divide between the stories that it tells that are based in the Bible and the stories that it tells that are based about the Quran's own community. There's no sense. Nobody ever goes on this 900-mile or whatever journey from the Hijaz to Canaan or back again. The Quran refers to the Masjid al-Haram as the cube, and the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple was a cube. And perhaps, I think most compelling of all, is the role of Jerusalem within the eschatological landscape. It is believed, or it was believed by Christians, that the major events of the apocalypse will take place in and around Jerusalem. The Messiah will descend on Mount Olives. He will then create this plain in Zechariah chapter 14. He will then come into the Jerusalem temple, and from there he will gather the nations of the world for judgment outside the gates of Jerusalem. And he will then cast the wicked into the fires of Gehenna. And this is exactly what we find in the Quran. The Quran talks about God creating this great plain of judgment. The Quran talks about seeing God's shin. The Quran talks about the wicked being thrown into the fires of what it calls Jahannam. And the Quran talks about going between Safa and Marwa. And Marwa is just an Arabized variant on Mount Moriah, which is where the temple was built. And Safa is an old name for Mount Scopus, which is just across the Kidron Valley. So all of these correspondences point towards the Jerusalem temple being the place that the Quran is constantly talking about, verse after verse, surah after surah.
Right. So, Paul, why don't you hold off to also your thoughts on this, because we're approaching the end of part 2, and I really would like for you to come back again and unpack this part for us, even at a deeper level, if you don't mind. And Thomas, if you don't mind waiting until part 3, because I want you to actually introduce yourself, and then we'll start with you by unpacking your thesis or findings concerning your passion when it comes to the Aramaic sources of the Quran. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all of you who have shared so far. And next part, we will have Thomas as well, who is the last guest here in this amazing panel that we have. And many people are complimenting that, and we're so thankful for that, of course. And if you have been joining us, we were actually doing this live stream on what we call the historical critique of Islam, introducing the S.I.N sifters, and the S.I.N stands for the Standard Islamic Narrative. Again, thank you so much, of course, Dr. J, for introducing all of this amazing panelists to us. And hopefully everyone is enjoying this. We still have 1 more hour to go, so don't go anywhere. We are going to wrap this part of the podcast, and we'll come back again in a few seconds to start part 3 of the podcast. But at the same time, we're continuing, of course, with this live stream. And I want to just say something to my moderators. Anyone who is distracting, block him. And I wish I can say the same thing about Jason Bourne, who is not Jason nor Bourne, by the way. I mean, he can dare to be Jason Bourne, the real one. But he's babbling the whole time. I wish the moderators over there will take care of this babbler. That's why he's not on my channel.
That's on Fender.
Yeah, that's why he's not on my channel, because we don't put up with this kind of stuff. But that's okay. You're fortunate, actually, that you are not on my channel right now. With that in mind, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Stay tuned for the next part in a few seconds.
Yeah, those real guys coming on mine. Jason Bourne's all the time.
Yeah,
he's a real troll. But he said he makes some stupid comments, and he just puts his foot in his mouth all the time. And you can see the people are taking good care of him.
Yeah,
they're shutting him down. That's part of the freedom of speech that we do have here.
All right, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and we're back again to continue with this amazing live stream where we have fabulous and amazing researchers and panelists who have joined us to discuss this standard Islamic narrative and the holes in that narrative. Each one of them comes at the narrative from a specific passion, specific angle, specific research area, and backed up with findings, obviously. They're not talking about it from an emotional standpoint. They're talking about it from factual standpoint. And that's what we're about here, whether in my channel, CIRA International, whether on Fander Films. we are presenting facts, and we're going to ask each one of them shortly to introduce also their own platforms where you can connect with them. You can benefit from some of the research and publications, whether in digital publications or maybe in a written form. But all that to say is that we are doing this for the benefit of everyone, including our Muslim friends that I am hoping that are watching us right now. And just go and examine the evidence. That's all I ask for. Just go and examine the evidence, and that's all we ask about. Well, we're left with one last panelist, and we are going to start this particular live stream and this particular part of the podcast with him, Thomas. Thomas, thank you so much, of course, for taking the time to be with us. And I would like for you really to tell people a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, obviously. And tell us also if you have your own platform, your own YouTube channel, and dive into the topic, the area of expertise that you focus on when it comes to the standard Islamic narrative. My understanding it has to do with Aramaic, of course.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Thomas Alexander. I'm from Germany, and my background is actually in computer science, which means that both by nature and by training, I would say I'm quite good at recognizing patterns and understanding systems, which turns out to be quite helpful when studying the history of Islam. So how did I even get into this? So I've always been a big, history nerd, if you will. So I've always been interested in history, and particularly the history of religions. And initially, actually, Islam wasn't high on my list. But that kind of changed when Christoph Luxemburg published his book on the Syro-Aramaic origins of the Quran in the year 2000. Although at that point, I wasn't all in, so I was aware of his work. I knew what he was talking about, that the Quran has has Aramaic origins, that it started out as a lectionary read in Christian churches, but in non-Trinitarian Christian churches. But at that point, I still didn't dig that much deeper. But that then changed roughly 15 years ago, I would say, when I randomly came across a radio program where Karl-Heinz Ohlig, who at that point in time was the head of the Inara Institute, was a guest, and he talked about their research and their findings, and I was absolutely fascinated because it actually went a lot deeper than what I thought from just hearing about Christoph Luxemburg. And I actually started to dig in, to read their papers that they publish and to see what this is all about. Maybe one quick word on this Inara Institute. So these are a group of scholars, which is, they're located in Saarbrücken in Germany, but it's not just German. So it's really an international effort. And they are sort of building on the old historical critical thinkers, like starting from the 19th century with Nöldeke and then Ignaz Goldziher. They've already sort of laid the foundation. Alphonse Mingana as well. He, I think, was the first to actually propose this, that there's a lot of Aramaic in the Quran in the 1920s. But then this field sort of died down a bit, and it was these Inara guys in the 1990s who picked this up again and brought it really to a bigger stage once again. And that's pretty much what I've been doing over the last 15 years. I've just studied, mainly for my own benefit, so I didn't share much of it, until Jay brought me onto his channel and asked me to share my findings, which I happily did. And now I'm currently, since now I've already collected everything for this YouTube format, I've now started to actually put together in book form, which I hope to finish at some point next year. It is a massive undertaking, but I hope it will all turn out well. I'm also trying to start my own YouTube channel. It's also on my list for the next year. Before I can bring it online, I want to pre-produce some things. So again, it's in the future. And yeah, I guess my main point of entry was this Aramaic origin of the Quran. because what we find out when we actually look at the Quran itself is that large parts of it just don't make a lot of sense, right? So they can't really be understood. When you read the tafsir, it'll say something along the lines of, the scholars can't agree, or God knows best. So basically, even the scholars don't know what's going on there. And with people like Christoph Luxemburg, we actually now have the tools to unlock these passages that previously were incomprehensible, right? And that's really what fascinates me so much, because it really opens a whole new door for understanding the Quran. And I would say that's what drives me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask each one of you, I'm going to go back